All right, this is an English beer tasting. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through some basic English style beers. Although I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't really balance these out particularly well. There's a lot of English styles that we are not going to taste. IPA originates as an English style, and we'll hit that at a later date because I found that traditionally, if we try like an English style IPA with an English tasting, Samuel Smith is what I usually use for that. It kind of gets washed out and you don't really adequately compare it to what IPA has become in an American craft brewery. So we're not going to taste an IPA. I'm not even really going to talk about it yet. We're also not going to taste a pale ale, which is a version. We're going to really kind of concentrate on English bitters and porters, and then sort of how stouts work out as a variety. So this first one, this beer that we're going to drink, this Boddington Pub Ale. So this is kind of a traditional English style ale. What happens with English beers, you actually start with beers like porters. You start with these darker beers. And over time, people want a lighter bodied beer. It's the same thing that happened with this evolution to lighter lager beers that we'll talk about in the next class. But the English, they want these lighter beers, and they start drinking beers that are known in England and that are also known in American craft beer circles as English style bitters. Now the issue with an English style bitter is that Americans were taught for a very long period of time that bitter was a bad thing. They didn't want to drink a beer that tasted bitter. So actually English bitters, by American standards, they're very low hopped. So you don't really get a great deal of bitter flavor out of an English bitter. So most people that actually sell an English bitter, which is really just kind of this basic traditional English style pub ale, they call it pub ale, because Americans are far more likely to buy a pub ale than they are an English bitter or an English special bitter. So that's what this Boddington is. You know, it's kind of your just classic sort of English style pub ale, an English bitter. This one is served like a lot of English beers, nitro, and it's in one of these funky little cans with a little ball in it that for engineering purposes that I don't understand tries to replicate a nitrogen pour. So as I have discussed, what you see when you pour a nitro beer is you're going to get a really big head on that beer immediately, and it's going to dissipate really quickly. So you've got this really nice, beautiful little cascading effect that's happening with this beer. You know, you've got this thing that foams up immediately, and then that head starts to dissipate pretty quickly. And what you're left with is a beer that's creamy, it's smooth. By traditional American standards, you know, if you are just learning to like imported craft beers, a lot of beers on nitro, and that's particularly true of these English pub styles, these you know, kind of legit original English style bitters, they're going to taste kind of flat to you because they are nitro poured beers. So they are not intended to be heavily carbonated beers. They're intended to be creamier, smoother, a little bit lighter. What you're not getting out of this beer is any really strong hop flavors. You're getting this very subtle, light malt that comes through, but it is kind of crisp. It's clean. It's a pretty refreshing little beer. According to their directions, it's best to serve this beer around about 41 degrees. So you serve it, you know, at a lower level. It is kind of a good classic English summer beer. Light bodied, but not too hoppy. That's Boddington's. Try it, see what you taste of it, see what you enjoy about it. or what you hate about it. The next beer that we're going to drink, this is the most classic of English style beers, although this beer is made in Michigan. So this is Founders Porter. This porter is just a CO2 carbonated porter made by Founders Brewing in Michigan. These guys make really good beers, and they've been making them very consistently. This is 6.5% ABV. What's interesting about this beer, one of the reasons I always drink it in class, is that it's 45 IBUs. Now 45 IBUs is starting to get pretty high in the IBU range. So typically you see a beer that's 45 IBUs. If you're drinking that in a pale ale, it's going to be a relatively hoppy beer. It's not going to be crazy hop, but it's going to be pretty crisp. It's going to be maybe a little bit bitter. Let's see if we taste that. What do you smell with this beer? A little bit of coffee. Taste with that beer. It's a bit of coffee. If you're looking for it, you can get a little bit of chocolate on the back end of this. And it's a little bit roasty. I mean, you're getting a little of those kind of roasty, toast kind of flavors, along with a bit of coffee and a very little subtle amount of chocolate in the back end of it. But it's also not finishing very sweet. Your finish on this beer is very light. Take a drink of this beer, it pretty much goes away. It doesn't hang around. That's what the hops are doing in this beer. So you're not tasting any of the hops, but that high IBU, what that is letting you know with this beer is the way they are crafting this beer is that you're getting a lot of those very traditional porter flavors, but the high hop content in this beer is letting it finish very clean, very crisp. I will also confess that as we do this, I'm suffering a bit from some allergies. So my sense of smell is not spectacular at the moment. And I'm not even, and that will also affect my sense of taste. So the next beer we are drinking is Guinness, and Guinness is decidedly not an English beer. This is an Irish beer. It is the most well-known Irish beer, one of the most well-known beers in the world. This is a classic Irish dry stout. You don't get a lot of really strong aroma from this beer. You get a little of those same flavors that you get from a traditional porter, a little bit of coffee. With a Guinness, you're also going to pick up, a Guinness is a little more bitter than what you'll find in a lot of porters, or really even in a lot of stouts. Guinness, it's a proprietary method, the way they brew it. They're very secretive about what they put in the beer. But it's something to do with the malt they use and the way they're using some form of specific black malt that goes into it. Gives it a little bit of bitterness. That bitterness is not coming from the hop in Guinness. It's actually coming from their mash. It's what they're doing with their malt and the grain content in the beer. But it's a little bit bitter. It's just a little bit roasty on the back end. Guinness is one of those beers that I drank when I was younger, and you know, I thought it was disgusting because it wasn't like anything that I'd ever had. And it took me a long time to get back to a Guinness and really try one again. And you know, when I went back to Guinness with a more refined palate, it's a beer I enjoy a lot. It's very well balanced. It's definitely a very distinct beer. It is also traditionally a nitro poured beer. You're never going to get a real nitro experience in a can, but they try to do it with some of these Guinness, you know, again, using this, whatever the engineering technique is that tries to replicate a nitro pour. Now, from there, what you can do with a stout is a few different things. There's sort of sub-varieties of stouts. So this goes back to an English beer. This again, we're drinking a nitro poured beer, right? So although not real nitro, it's not on tap, they're doing a pretty good job of replicating the pour that you get from this. So we get this huge head on this beer, we get this beautiful little cascading effect with it. And this is a Young's Double Chocolate Stout. This is a beer that they use not only a chocolate malt with, but they actually, I think, roast with chocolate as well. What I get, again, is a little more actually kind of a coffee aroma. And you definitely get chocolate from this beer. Now, when I say you definitely get chocolate from this beer, and this beer's packaging says double chocolate stout, you know, if you taste this and you're looking for something that tastes like chocolate milk that's over the top chocolate, you're not going to get that. This is more of a Guinness with a very distinct kind of chocolate flavor to it. It's subtle. You know, it doesn't taste like a Hershey bar, but it is definitely there. You definitely get the chocolate coming through in this flavor. And this is a great beer to really get a sense of mouthfeel with. Because they are doing a nice job of replicating the nitro pour with this, it's very creamy. So it feels creamier on the tongue. So creamy, not overcarbonated, very chocolatey, just a little bit of kind of a subtle smoke bitterness, but just a tiny amount that I get kind of in the back end of it. If you have never tried beers with desserts, I highly recommend it. There's ways to pair them very well. And there's actually the best thing to do with them frequently is contrast, but the easiest way to start with that is if you take a beer that has something like notes of chocolate and you drink this beer with something that has chocolate in it, it's actually going to enhance the chocolate flavors that you taste in this beer. You know, if you taste this at first and you say, I don't know what this nut job is talking about with all this chocolate flavor, because it doesn't taste very chocolatey to me. That's because you're looking for very obvious kind of chocolate notes to it. But if you drink this beer with something that is true chocolate, you know, chocolate cake or something, you are actually going to find that the chocolate flavor, as you go back to the beer, the flavors are going to be a little more pronounced when you're pairing those two things together. So the last beer we're going to do for this English tasting, this one also is an American beer, and this is Left Hand Brewing Company. Another really good brewing company. These guys, actually I'm not sure that they're independent anymore. I think they got sold to one of the huge conglomerates last year or two. But they have traditionally been a really solid craft brewery. This beer is another one that is typically served on nitro. Now this is not canned in any way that's going to make it nitro. So, you know, when we pour this beer, we're not getting that nitrogen cascading effect that we just had in this Young's Double Chocolate. What we really get is a beer that just doesn't have a lot of head on it, even when we're pouring it straight up. So the way really that Left Hand is trying to replicate a nitro finish, a nitro texture on this beer, is they're just not carbonating that much. So let's smell it. Both mouthfeel and taste, it's creamy, it's smooth. You also get a bit of chocolate in this. a lot less than I would find in this Young's Double Chocolate. There's a little bit of chocolate to it. You know, there's a much more subtle kind of coffee flavor than what you would get out of this Guinness or its Founders. And you taste the creaminess here. Again, that's, to me, it's both mouthfeel on this beer as well as the flavor of the beer itself. So this style, you know, both of these are relatively old styles actually. You know, this, like a chocolate stout, that's something they started doing quite a while ago. But milk stouts in particular are really old. Milk stouts originally, they would add lactose to these beers, which they still do. So if you're vegan, by the way, I guess you can opt out of the left-hand milk stout and any milk stout because they do use lactose in these products. This is not a vegan beer. But your left-hand milk stout and milk stouts, not just the left-hand, but milk stouts traditionally, they started brewing these beers specifically for invalids, sick people, people that were, you know, ill of some serious thing, and even, you know, digestive problems. Milk stout, the idea was that this was a low ABV beer. It had the lactose in it for the creaminess of it. You know, this little bit of dairy that's in it. It's adding a nutritional aspect to it. It's also just making it easier to drink. It's a really smooth beer, kind of this comforting sort of beer. I enjoy these a lot in the winter. So, between the three of these, you know, what you get is a really nice array of what's out there in terms of stouts in particular. You know, the pride of Ireland right here, good old traditional Guinness. You go back into, you know, an English stout with this Young's Double Chocolate and a nice American version of a milk stout. This Founders Porter I find to be one of the best porters that's out there on the market. Deschutes out of Oregon also makes a spectacular porter. I forget what it's called, but it might just be called Deschutes Porter. I think there's an actual name to the beer. But Deschutes, look for that one. I enjoy it a lot. The best brewery for any of these styles in Greater Cincinnati is always going to be Wooden Cask. It's really their thing. They focus on English beers, and in particular, North English style beers. That brewery is one that is doing something a little bit differently than most in the region. Cask does a really nice job of handling particularly beers like bitter English bitters. And you go there and they will call it a pub ale because a pub ale will sell and a bitter won't. But they do a really nice bitter. They do some beautiful barrel-aged porters and some of it's seasonal stuff. So these styles, I suggest you play around with them a bit. And whenever it is, you know, safe or possible to do so again, I highly recommend that you go to the Wooden Cask in Newport, do a flight, and play around with some of these styles. It's good stuff, and if you are just making your transition from, you know, Bud Light into adulthood, they're kind of a rough place to start at times. I mean, they're a big jump. But if you are a hop hater, English beers are usually going to be the way to go, at least when it comes to, you know, even a beer like a pub ale, even a beer that's called a bitter, they're not really very bitter. And the rest of these styles, they're very malt forward, and it's really the malt bill in the beer that's driving most of the predominant flavor of it. So those are English beers. Hope that you enjoyed these, and I hope you go out and try some more of them. And if you hated all of them, never fear, there will still be a beer for you.